Welcome, and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Dave Mazik, the director of the VA Lighthouse program in the Office of Information Technology at the Veterans Affairs Department. Dave, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Joe. I'm really excited to be here today.
Happy to have you. And by way of introduction, just tell us a little bit more about VA Lighthouse and your oversight of it and how it interfaces with, of course, a much broader department, the VA.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And so it's really aligned with the digital transformation effort at VA to really give veterans and our partners an experience, a delightful end user experience that's really on par with what they're used to in the commercial industry. Right? Our veterans are used to a very digital interface in how they interact with their businesses and the different needs. We want to really enable that similar experience on the federal side for the data and services that they need. So Lighthouse is really set up to essentially be that easy front door to provide secure access to data and services that are critical to those veterans, and giving them the choice of whether they use natively VA developed applications, or there's maybe applications they want to bring on devices that they have that they want to connect to their VA data in ways that they choose.
So, Dave, of course, there are a lot of irons in the fire here at VA when it comes to modernization. Give me a better sense of how VA Lighthouse, how that fits into this broader puzzle of modernization and how this is one piece of that modernization strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we really want to do is Lighthouse has traditionally been a application programming interface, or API program. And APIs are essentially an analogy we often give is like that wall socket of accessing electricity for devices you may have in your home. It's really how you get that data and services that you need from VA using either VA developed applications or third-party trusted and approved applications that veterans want to connect. And one of the things we do in terms of digital modernization is with that API abstraction layer, we enable connections to very important legacy backend systems to very modern applications on the front end. And that separation and that abstraction allows us to modernize those backend systems, improve their reliability, improve their cost, improve their performance, while doing that in a seamless fashion across the application landscape, so that we don't have to have these sort of big, red flag days where everyone migrates all together. Those APIs allow people to migrate on their own schedules and their own timelines with minimal to no disruption to the end user experience.
Okay, great. And, of course, when we talk about the VA, we talk about a wealth of data. This is never the problem that there's not enough data. It's, in fact, a lot of data to get your arms around here. And it seems like the cloud is a big enabler of that. So with that in mind, what cloud modernization projects have been undertaken by VA in recent years, and how have those cloud modernization projects benefited the VA Lighthouse program?
Obviously, the whole effort to move to cloud through VA Enterprise Cloud with both Azure and AWS has been hugely beneficial, from the ability to increase scalability, right? So especially when we're talking about enabling veterans with applications of their choice, we really can't control the demand. It's up to the veteran and how they want to use their apps and connect to their data. So cloud really enables us to scale and still maintain really good end user experience and performance. It also allows those systems to be up whenever the veteran may need them, or whenever third-party developers may need access to APIs to develop their applications. So the reliability and the availability. And then lastly, from a security perspective, right, traditionally a program at VA would have to secure the entire stack all the way up from the operating system, and VA Enterprise Cloud really bootstraps us to allow us to inherit all those security controls to really improve our security posture and our compliance with NIST 853. So really, in just multiple dimensions, it's a huge enabler from a security perspective in terms of performance and end user experience, and really being able to deliver that delightful end user experience.
Okay, great. And of course, what's really interesting about this program office is that this is a cool intersection of like the IT and the technology and the customer experience side of things. Being that digital front door for the veterans is, of course, a huge mission. And so how does the Lighthouse program seek to improve that customer experience at VA, particularly for the healthcare and benefits that VA is, of course, synonymous with?
Yeah, great question. So one of the things we really want to make sure is that the end user experience is good. And that doesn't just mean from a functional perspective, right? If you're an end user that's accustomed to going to your bank to download your financial transactions, for example, you become accustomed to a very certain standard of performance and availability. So Lighthouse has really taken that on as part of its core mission, that with the performance and availability of the APIs that are made available to these third-party applications and to veterans meet those commercial standards. And one, a couple of ways we're doing that is, so one interface we have enables veterans to seamlessly connect to 10 years of their health history, irrespective of what sites they may have gone to receive care, with a single autonomous secure integration. So they essentially provide their VA credentials once, and then their application of choice among those approved by VA is able to download all that information in a way that's convenient for them to both access and share in ways that they choose. We also enable, so veterans today can submit benefits claims in a self-service fashion through va.gov, and many veterans choose to do that. But it is a very complicated process. So a lot of our veterans work with veteran service organizations to help guide them through that process. And traditionally, they would sit down with them at the end of that, they would print out a piece of paper and they would either mail that or fax that to VA. So what we've done is we've enabled that to become a digital transaction. So essentially enable APIs instead of post and fax machine transport, if you will. So we do roughly 75,000 benefits claims submissions a month that would have otherwise taken weeks to come in the mail or be sent via fax and then to be scanned in. So those are just two of the ways. There's certainly others out there as well.
All right, and just to pull on that thread for a little bit longer, the scope of things is really pretty wild in terms of the benefits submissions that you guys have to deal with on a monthly basis. The cloud, of course, can be a real enabler of the automation that could be a force multiplier for agencies like VA. And so with that in mind, can we unpack that a little bit more about how the cloud can be a driver of that automation and make sure that this volume of claims is dealt with in a timely fashion?
Yeah. So again, I think it really gets to meeting end users where they are and making sure they have an experience which is something they're accustomed to in other areas of private industry. So again, just touching upon that, really that ability to scale up in any way and still meet performance as if just a single user happens to be accessing VA at that point in time. So that's really just huge. And then of course, you can imagine the amount of health information for all veterans that may have received care over the past 10 years. It's immense, right? Because there's roughly 9 million patients in VA. I think in the past year, over 6 million of them, I think, actually received care at some point. So that's just an immense amount of data, right? And of course, the ability to serve that data up in cloud, just in a reliable and performant way, is so much easier than having to build all that infrastructure in a dedicated server farm in VA. So just that ability to scale up and that ability to process and manage just immense amounts of data in a high quality fashion is so much easier with what clouds enable.
And of course, it's really worth driving home this point about how VA is the tip of the spear of this administration-wide effort around customer experience, in this case, a digital customer experience. In terms of the lessons learned that other agencies can take away from this, because I think a spotlight is being shined on VA in this regard, what are some of the things that are worth unpacking in greater detail of what are the bones of a really important, a really successful customer experience strategy when it comes to the digital side of things?
Yeah, I think it's many of the themes you'll hear in modern agile software development. And even though we're an API program, we may not build the end application that the veteran ends up seeing. Human-centered design is still a critical piece of what we do, right? Working with developers instead of for them. So doing user research with developers, right? If we will watch developers walk through documentation, for example, like is the documentation easy for them to figure out how an API works and what it does without having to ask VA questions. We'll even work with end users because we want to make sure that the APIs that VA is providing are answering the right question and providing access to the right data. And that might not always be discovered by some of the application developers. Sometimes, VA has to have that conversation. So that's really important. Another thing that's really important is deploying often, right? You want to add value each and every day if you can, and you want to incorporate that feedback from those user research sessions and user feedback and human-centered design as often as you can, right? So going to really a full DevSecOps model where you can deploy often and early so that you get value out to the community and also incorporate that feedback really quickly. So really, those are some of our big tenets on the program in terms of making it successful.
And one other element of that I just wanted to explore in a little bit more detail is, I think I already brought up a little bit, but the digital front door, the no wrong door, there's a lot of door metaphors with the administrations speaking about this. But, of course, there are a lot of, .gov websites out there. It can be overwhelming sometimes for a veteran to navigate and know, they know what benefit they're looking for. They know what service they're looking for, where they're going to find it. Can be a needle in a haystack situation. And so on that side of things, how do you make sure that the end user can go from point A to point B in a way that's timely and reasonable?
Yeah, great question. So I think with the November 2018 launch or relaunch of VA.gov, I think that was really instrumental in driving the veteran to a single touch point with VA for any service they needed. Right? If you had looked at that website prior to that relaunch, it was more of a description of VA and its organizations and its functional silos. Whereas post November 2018, it became, I'm a veteran, I need access, I need something from VA. Here's where I go, whether it be health, benefits, cemetery related information. Very similar on the API front. We want a single documentation site for all APIs, irrespective of what administration they serve. So we have a symbol developer.va.gov. So that is meant to be a centralized point where all developers, irrespective of how they're coming to VA, can find a suite of APIs necessary to interact with VA and build meaningful applications for our veterans. So really sort of trying to focus the end user in a single location is really instrumental for making sure we maximize the value of what we deliver, either directly to the veteran or indirectly through those third-party applications.
And Dave, to look at this another way here, how is the Lighthouse program, providing customer experience regardless of how the user's connecting, whether they're on desktop, whether they're on mobile? There's more ways to get that data at their fingertips here, but on the back end, how is VA making that possible?
Yeah, I think there's a great example, which we just actually launched in December of last year. It's something we call it claims automation, also referred to as virtual regional office at times. So many veterans, when they're filing benefits claims, actually are already patients at VA. So if you wanted to file an additional disability claim or even an initial disability claim, and let's say you have hypertension, what's traditionally been the case is the benefits administration, okay, thank you very much. We'd like you to go in and make an appointment with the VA physician and confirm that you actually have hypertension. Well, if the veteran's a patient already, VA should already know that. So what we're doing is, irrespective of how a claim comes in, whether it's still sent via mail or fax, whether it's self-service for VA.gov, or it's coming in through Lighthouse APIs and that Veteran Service Organization intake that we discussed before, what we've enabled in the back end, think of it as like sort of like this little micro engine running in the background here on the claim as it comes into VA. We're looking into VA's health history to see if that veteran actually is a patient and looking for certain conditions they may already have. So what we're essentially is automating that claims adjudication to take health data into consideration in conjunction with the benefits claim. And what that ends up doing is that ends up reducing what is typically a 50-day approval timeline down to 2 days. Since going live in December of 2021, we've actually saved over 20,000 waiting days for veterans in that benefits adjudication process. So I think that's sort of like a great example of things on the back end that may be somewhat invisible, but really bring market improvement, irrespective of how that veteran chooses to interface with VA.
That's a really powerful example of how results are getting done here. To circle back to something that you had mentioned earlier, Dave, about DevSecOps, how this has got to be a culture of continuous implementation, folding that feedback in, making sure that there's that positive feedback loop continuously going on here. That does seem to be something that a lot of agencies are trying to make happen, make possible, build that culture into their IT, their public-facing IT, and so. Let's maybe spend a little bit of time there in terms of, how agencies can get that off the ground and do it successfully.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's a culture. It's really recognizing that You don't have to build the entire car with all the bells and whistles, but you have to build something functional that will get you from point A to B to start, and then improving and incrementing on it. Secondly, you have to be able to do this reliably. So you want to make sure you build reliable CI/CD pipelines. You have proper monitoring and alerting, because if you ship, every day, but you're breaking your production application every day, well, that's not a very valuable exercise either. And then just making sure that you have optimized processes, right? You want to make sure security doesn't suffer as a result of shipping daily. You want to make sure that you're maintaining all compliance with your ATOs and making sure your security posture is just as good as if you had released quarterly or slower. So really, a combination of things, from culture to technology to process.
A natural follow-on to that is, of course, that culture change piece of things. Some of the biggest technology problems aren't ever technology problems. They're the things that go along with it. And so in terms of getting people on board, understanding the value of it, and then going out and doing it, what are some best practices that you see from your day-to-day?
Yeah, so obviously training, right, and education is a big piece of it. Another thing that's been hugely beneficial and hugely successful at VA is rotation of digital service people coming in and working closely with the office of the CTO in terms of those people really being able to enable VA to sort of step up their game. So that's been hugely beneficial, having that in the Presidential Innovation Fellows Program as well. So really getting people who are very well versed in modern digital practices from private industry or even the federal space coming in and being able to really show VA what can be done from a technology process and people perspective is really, really super helpful in that regard.
Yeah, and I guess that's probably worth spending a little bit of time there as well in terms of the pipeline of people, the talent, the people who are bringing in the ideas and bringing in the expertise. You mentioned the PIF, you mentioned that rotational aspect of bringing people in, doing a tour duty, and then going back to where they were in terms of their work. Tell me a little bit more about how VA is ensuring that pipeline of innovation and talent is coming through the doors.
Yeah, so we're really trying to do things, continue that process of bringing people in from digital service, but from a full-time permanent hire perspective as well. We're really trying to bring in people that are familiar with more modern practices, as well as for people that are at VA. There's still a lot of talent in VA, even with the existing staff, and we're just getting them the ability to know that there's different ways of doing things without compromising any risk to the veteran and delivering more meaningful ways from an education and skill set perspective. I think there's sort of three pillars there, right? Is there was rotational from digital service, the upskilling and education, and then bringing in, fresh eyes from outside VA that have maybe had some experience with these more modern practices.
All right. And of course, whenever we talk about the accessibility of data, it's always, two halves of the same coin. Of course, it is so much of what this conversation has been focused around, which is ease of access, giving it to the end users, giving it to the users in a way that is putting a premium on their ease of use, the portability of it. And of course, the other side of it, especially with healthcare data, is that sensitivity nature. There's, of course, a lot of statutory requirements with the data and the protections that go around it for a number of good reasons. And so it's always a very tricky balance in my mind. And so from your perspective on things, how does VA, achieve that balance of these two overwhelming, goals?
Yeah, I love that question. I think it's something that we deal with literally on a daily basis. So it's definitely a balance between security and making sure the veteran is protected, but also making sure that we don't lock things down so much that they're not able to access their data in ways that they choose. So there's a couple tenets for that. So one is we want to make sure security is built in by default, that it's not simply policy on a paper. And we want that to be using best commercial practices that veterans may experience in their interaction with their financial institutions, for example. So industry standards like OAuth 2.0 and TLS 1.2. In addition to that, you want to do a zero trust veteran focused security. So basically, when a veteran accesses their data, we don't simply want that application to have carte blanche access to all veterans' data. We want that security to be scoped to the digital veteran. So if there does happen to be a breach or security issue, the attack surface is limited to one user's data rather than the entire patient population. And then in addition to that, we want to make sure that the veteran really understands what that application is doing, how it's connecting to VA, what data it's going to be pulling down. And then once that data is pulled down into their application that they're approved by VA, but application of their choice, what is that application going to do with the data? Is it going to share it with third parties in an anonymized fashion? Is it going to sit on a device? Is it going to be in the cloud? So we do a really thorough privacy policy review in terms of service review. A lot of this is influenced by VA's ethics principles that came out a little over a year ago about sharing of veteran data. But it's really about making sure that they're written in plain language, veterans can understand them. And then it really describes the life cycle of their data and what data is pulled from VA so that they're really in the driver's seat of if they see something they don't like, they can say no and decide to not use that application, or making sure that they're comfortable in granting that application approval to connect to their data.
Let's actually spend a little bit more time on the VA ethics principles around data, because, of course, it seems like a lot of thought has been put into this on the back end in terms of all of this. But, I think just knowing that document is out there gives a lot of peace of mind to the people who are on the public end of things. Can you maybe walk through some of the key pillars of that and, how that is a document that can be really effectively put into practice?
Absolutely. So I guess first and foremost, we want to make sure that whatever we're doing in terms of sharing data through VA with veteran consent is that it's equitable to all veterans, right? We don't want to necessarily benefit a subset of the veteran population, especially if it comes as a disadvantage to another subset of the population. So that's a balance there. The data needs to be treated in a secure fashion, right? So that I think is pretty obvious. We definitely don't want veteran data to be sold. So that's a key tenet there. It also needs to benefit the veteran in some meaningful way. And then to that privacy policy, we want to make sure the veteran understands what that data is, what data is being accessed, how it's being used. Also important is if the veteran decides they don't like that application, they need to be able to break that connection and make sure all their data is removed. So really, it's all focused on the veteran and the outcome that the veteran will have with that data, and ensuring that in addition to those outcomes, the veteran's in the driver's seat and the data is being treated securely.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for unpacking that. And earlier you said a very key phrase, which is zero trust. And, there's a lot of talk about zero trust these days. And it is certainly as much, a mindset change as it is a technology change. And so can you give us a debrief on the VA's current implementation of zero trust and where things are going with that?
Yeah, so it's definitely an important aspect of what VA is doing as part of its, in addition to its modernization strategy. Right, it essentially is VA is moving to a world where we want to really limit the attack surface and not take advantage of the fact that things may all be running inside a VA network. So basically getting credentials that are scoped to the individual user, whether it be a veteran or a clinician, to limit the attack surface. And then similarly, not simply accepting a request because it's from a certain application, but actually validating that individual user scope credential on each and every interaction, so that there's full traceability, full validation, and full accounting and auditing capabilities for each and every transaction with security tokens that are time-bound, individual users bound, and bound to particular data access scopes. In other words, if I'm a veteran, I shouldn't necessarily have access to all my health information. That there may be some that is uniquely specific to the clinician. So limiting those scopes based on the user and validating those scopes on each and every transaction.
Okay. And of course, this became something that has been on the minds of every agency, CIO office or, IT modernization office, given the administration's focus on this with some executive orders. Has this been something that was on VA's radar before the executive order? Has this elevated some aspects of your zero trust strategy in any kind of way, just to take that further step on the zero trust conversation?
Yeah, it's definitely elevated. I think, getting back to your first part of the question, I think when the Lighthouse program was first set up, we really leveraged best in private industry in terms of authentication. So we were already there ahead of that executive order in terms of moving to veteran facing credentials, just because that's what is commonly used in private industry when you're accessing individual data. So we really leverage the best in commercial industry to get us there. But certainly the recent the executive order obviously is really upping our game in terms of all the backend connections we have to satisfy that front end request. So even though the front end request may be very patient or individual user specific, we still have a good bit of work to do on the back end to carry that all the way through to all the backend systems we may need to connect to satisfy the requests coming from individual users.
All right. And since you mentioned this is, the best practices from industry, of course, it does take a village to do all this kinds of work, and that, the vendor community, industry writ large has a role in all of this. How does the cloud, which is kind of the foundation of this conversation, how does the cloud enable partnerships with these outside developers who can contribute to this important work?
Yeah, great question. So I think it gets back to what empowers developers to build applications that benefit the veteran. So really good documented APIs, really clear benefit to developers as to what those APIs will do is really paramount. Providing environments, not just production environments, but development environments that are readily accessible and scalable and reliable. So we found that if developers can't read an API, get a sandbox credential with synthetic patient data, and make an API call, if they can't do that within a few minutes, they'll often just walk away. So having those things be really clear and prominent, really accessible, secure, but really accessible and really reliable is really fundamental to getting that developer to do the initial work of developing that using their own funding. And then secondly, in terms of like production, if that application is not delivering a good end user experience, that private organization is not going to be successful. So again, cloud's ability to scale, available to improve its security posture, availability, its capability to increase its availability and reliability, right? All those things end up resulting in a good end user experience, which obviously not just benefits VA and the end user, but also that private organization building that application as well.
Okay. And as kind of a part two to that, it takes a village side of things, it seems like there's a really robust community within the federal government, within other partner agencies, in terms of putting heads together and doing the best, learning from other agencies, trial and error. And, in terms of like what, say, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services have done in this kind of space, are there things that VA has been able to collaborate with them when it comes to VA Lighthouse?
Yeah, so that we're very familiar with the CMS Blue Button program, and we have regular discussions with that team. They're really a great team, and I think they were really instrumental in trailblazing what came with Lighthouse from the health API perspective. So that's been hugely beneficial. Lighthouse is also aligning itself to the ONC 21st Century Peers Act out of CMS, not just because it's a mandate and it's important to meet that mandate, but it's driving the entire industry. So by doing that, all those applications out there that are doing that work for other providers and other pays will that more easily be able to connect to Lighthouse and enable that service for veterans as well. So yeah, lots of best practice sharing. There's efforts at HHS as well. Lots of API interest and discussions ongoing to sort of leverage that, upping the federal space API game to meet the expectations that private industry has come to expect from all the popular API programs that are out there that enable many of the commercial industry.
Okay, and is there like a regular kind of routine forum where this happens? Is this a thing that happens at the CIO Council? Is it something else that takes place here?
Yeah, there's a lot of pairwise conversations going on. I don't know if there's any official forum, but I think that's something we should really look forward to really leverage best practices going on again in the future. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. And I think we talked about this a little bit already, but in terms of how the cloud is central to the benefit side of things with the APIs there, we talked a little bit about the automation piece of things, but in just terms of having that, I guess, 360-degree view of a veteran's experience, can you tell me a little bit more about how the cloud has made that possible and the value of having that big picture look of a veteran's navigation through the agency?
Yeah, so again, cloud has really just enabled us to scale up. So aside from the benefit space, we talked about the health information, the veterans being able to get that using applications of their choice. We also enable third-party lenders to actually submit loan guarantee applications to VA digitally. So again, here's something that traditionally would have been a mail or fax, now being turned into a digital transaction, right? And enabling all the benefits that come with that in terms of better error checking in real time, better processing times, more modern ways of working with those lenders that they're used to with private industry. Another example is sharing the data across agencies. So we're working with the National Verifier application, which traditionally helps veterans receive subsidized telecom services. So there's information they need from VA to obtain that. So we're working on API efforts there to streamline what is a paper process into a digital one today. Another case is we're working with USA Jobs. So if veterans want to apply for veterans preference for a federal position, today they have to scan and upload their DD-214. Well, VA has a lot of that information in conjunction with DoD. So we're looking at enabling that to be a digital transaction. So simply just providing their VA credentials, approving the connection, and downloading that application USA Jobs to streamline that process for the veteran as well. So it's really broad spectrum across all those touch points, right? And all the self-service capabilities that VA.gov has come, Lighthouse is trying to enable that from a partner and third-party solution as well. So that, again, applications that veterans have come to like and use can also be enabled with VA as needed, and to really streamline that experience for the veteran as well.
All right. Well, that really seems to get at the value of this single sign-on, that it's not, a maze of different usernames, passwords that veterans have to navigate here, that it is all in one dashboard for them to click through here. And I guess one thing that's worth bringing into the conversation when it comes to that is the login.gov being kind of a backbone to making that possible here. Can you speak a little bit more about how login.gov is an enabler of all of this?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so I guess up until maybe a few months ago, we supported, just like VA.gov, 3 different logins, believe it or not, which is far too many a choice, but more historical than anything. So if you're coming from DoD, you had a DS login account. So a lot of veterans chose and continue to choose to use that to access their VA services. If you happen to be a VA patient, you could also potentially have a My Healthy Vet credential, which is used. So we want to allow that option for veterans. And then lastly, VA had enabled a commercial identity solution in ID.me several years ago. So those are the 3 options, both for VA.gov and for third-party applications connecting to VA. Same credential, right? So it's transparent to the veteran if they're coming in through, say, a third-party health application like Apple Health or Common Health or Clear. They could use any of those 3 as they would natively log into VA.gov. And then most recently, which we're really excited about, is we enable login.gov as well. So the benefits of things like ID.me and login.gov is those credentials will work at more than just DoD or VA. So they can be used at SSA, GSA, many different agencies. Single credential, veteran doesn't have to write down and remember different passwords for each agency they may interact with. They can use that common login.gov credential, which is really, really powerful.
Okay, well, of course, this is a program that is, relatively young. I think 2018 is when we first saw things get into motion here. But it seems like there's big things in the works for VA Lighthouse for the years to come. Can you maybe give us a sense of where you would like things to go in the coming years?
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely continuing to expand the third-party capabilities there in terms of APIs that are available and applications that veterans and VA partners will want to use. We're also doing a lot of things inside VA. So one of the things we've found over time is developing APIs in general in VA is not the easiest thing. So we're really trying to do some things to help those teams. So one is we're looking at doing continuous ATR, continuous RMF work. So a lot of the ATO process works very well if you have a slower release cadence. But if you're trying to ship daily, some of that becomes a little bit burdensome. So we're looking at adding technology and process to enable more secure and more compliant applications in spite of shipping daily. So we're doing a lot of work there. We're also doing work to provide some common infrastructure. So when the team wants to build an API, they don't have to think so much about building a CI/CD pipeline or building monitoring and alerting infrastructure for post-deployment production. So we're essentially giving them the tools and the framework so that they can focus, 95+% of their time on the API and the problem space rather than infrastructure and deployment and cloud resource consumption. So really like providing a microservice enablement, if you will, for teams to really quickly come in and build, deploy, and secure APIs, which will just bootstrap the entire ecosystem, both inside VA and out, because you'll have readily accessible, high-performant modern APIs that applications can then immediately connect to and start providing value to, whether that be VA staff, partners, or veterans themselves.
Okay, and to circle back to a much earlier part of the conversation, what's really interesting about all this is, I've spoken to a number of agency chief data officers about this, they're really stuck on data inventories to really know what data they have in order to kind of put it to work and get that maximum value out of the data. But it seems that with this, API approach to the data of bringing it to the veterans' hands when they need it, that you're kind of able to work on top of that legacy IT and kind of do things not all in one fell swoop, but things can be kind of parceled out into manageable bites. Is that a fair way of phrasing it, or is there more that we can go into in terms of that part of the conversation?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Data is not usable if you don't know about it or you can't connect to it. So APIs in our platform, what we're really trying to do is we're really trying to do a bunch of things in those domains. So one is discovery, right? So basically going somewhere that you can find documentation that allows you to find the data yourself, allows you to understand what it is, how you can use it in a reliable manner, right? You shouldn't have to have 10 meetings or send 10 emails or ask for permission to a lockdown SharePoint site. You should have the most easy, transparent way of getting discovery of that data as possible. Once you discover that data, you might want to start building an application. So building self-service sandbox environments. So if I'm a developer and I want to start playing around with an application with that data to see what I might be able to do with it, I want to be able to get an access credential for that sandbox environment with synthetic data really quickly. So having that ability to actually start making API calls with synthetic data in a self-service fashion, always providing support if necessary, but ideally no touch points to get that far. And then in addition to that, so say you've gone through all that work, you really want that sandbox environment to be as similar to production as possible. Because what you want to do is you want to go to production quickly. You don't want to have manual test points, manual checkpoints. You don't want to describe that you had 20% of development that was buried because you didn't see something in your development environment. So making sure that synthetic data is really representative of the real data you will see in production, making sure the API calls are identical in their implementation to what you get in the production environment. So all of that, just making data discoverable, easily accessible, and reliable and robust is really the best way to unlock that data. And APIs are really, a key tenet in getting that outcome.
Okay, well, VA Lighthouse, of course, has a fairly bright future ahead of it here. And again, 4 years can either be, rather a lot or a little, depending on how you look at it. In terms of the milestones or the lessons learned throughout this life cycle of this program, are there things you look back and say, these are big accomplishments? Are there things that will be foundational to further efforts here that you'd like to maybe spend a little bit of time talking about?
Yeah, great question. So I guess one of the biggest takeaways that surprised us over the past few years is this is really set up to unlock access to third-party applications that veterans may choose to use. But now we're roughly 130 applications, and I think over 55 of those are actually internal VA applications. So that was really a big surprise in that the value we delivered for third parties also has immense value internally. So really that was, I think, a big surprise. Another part of that is we're finding that the integration and the customer experience for those internal developers versus third-party developers is a bit different. So we're tailoring our internal platforms to be a little more specific to that internal user base. So for example, internal users will want to see changes that go to production immediately. Because if they have a problem, they need to chase down a VA developer, or they just might want new functionality that they might want to build in really quickly. They also want to know that hey, where are you actually getting your data from? What service are you actually connecting to? Right? As VA modernizes and collapses and combines systems, there's a lot of questions about where the data is ultimately coming from or what service you're using. So they want a much deeper understanding of what that API is actually connecting to. So those, I think, were probably two of the biggest surprises that we've come across in the past few years.
Okay, well, Dave, we've covered an awful lot of ground here in this conversation. But are there any, kind of closing thoughts or any key takeaways you want to leave with our audience here so that they have some better understanding of what they should take away from this conversation and what they can do with it?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I guess anything we do, if it's not used, it's not valuable to us. So I would encourage anyone to just go to developer.va.gov and build an app. It's free. You can get it on the public internet. And then hopefully you move to production and provide value to VA or a veteran. So that would be awesome. And then, of course, if there's any questions, people can send emails to api@va.gov. So hopefully those are two names that are very easy to remember. And you can ask questions about our external API platform or even some of the things we're doing internal to VA that will help those internal customers a bit more that I mentioned earlier. So yeah, thanks for the time. This was awesome.
Likewise, thanks for your time. I'd like to thank today's guest, Dave Mazik, the director of the VA Lighthouse program in the Office of Information Technology at the Veterans Affairs Department. I'm your moderator, Jory Heckman, and you're listening to Federal News Network. Now let me send you back to the studio for more on the Cloud Exchange.